The really interesting part of nonlinear dynamics, to use a technical term, is things change. The system can be operating in this way for a certain period of time, and then it can flip and operate in a very different way. Now that could be catastrophic, so we could have a highly stable overall environment for life like ours on the planet for a couple million years, but then it could flip and become very adverse, but it can flip other ways too. So that's what I think really intrigued me, was nonlinear systems are not predictive. They really have structural causes and structural tendencies, but they can flip. It is literally the technical definition of a nonlinear system. It can generate multiple modes of behavior, and those can be triggered or flipped, actually sometimes quite surprisingly.
So what, in dealing into system dynamics, what is it that, from a science base, is contributed to how we deal with these situations? That we know do exist, but we don't know how to deal with them.
Well, but we're oriented. We know a Renaissance occurred, and there have been Renaissances, tips like that, in many cultures' histories around the world. So we're kind of naturally interested in that. And I think that if we look at even a superficial understanding of what happens in those time periods, again, there's a phenomenal part and there's a consciousness part. Suddenly, painting, take European history, goes from being very kind of idealistic. You look at the painting of the 11, 12, 1300s. It's not that people didn't understand perspective. They didn't actually use perspective. The idea of perspective has been around since the Greeks, right? But they didn't use it. The paintings are flat. They weren't really interested in depicting reality. They were interested in depicting an idea. So there's kind of an idealism in that painting, and maybe often religious, right? So you had a person and you saw an aura around them. All of a sudden, realism becomes important, because in the Renaissance there's a mindset shift that the human being is part of the phenomenal world, and if we orient our consciousness in that way, it'll have profound aesthetic effects. So then we have a Leonardo and a Michelangelo right there, and there, Michelangelo literally is spending much of his life studying cadavers so that he can really understand the musculature, not so he get it technically correct, but so that he can evoke something that pulls people into their reality, not away from their reality. Obviously, the sensibility in Europe, in the quote what we call the Middle Ages or even Dark Ages, is to kind of step out of reality, right? Because your whole life is just a preparation for the afterlife. So there's nothing that an aesthetic world is doing except helping you step out of that reality, because that was the orientation, that was the consciousness. All of a sudden in the Renaissance, you're stepping into this reality, because it's not just about the afterlife, it's about the beauty and joy of living right now. So that just illustrates that these deep shifts, these epochal societal shifts, have, you might say, ultimately, they're aesthetic. Because I think aesthetics is what integrates our inner world and our outer world. That's why art, ironically today, art has always had it over science in a particular way. Yes, science is important, that understanding of the external phenomenal world. But at some level, only when it becomes aesthetic does it cross the boundary of the internal and the external. I think great scientists do that. I think that's what an Einstein, that's what Umberto Maturana do. These extraordinary scientists who are deeply into understanding the phenomenal world in a way that they're never forgetting, what does it mean for me? Who, as Umberto says, Umberto Maturana, a very famous Chilean biologist, who one of his great sayings is, all things said are said by somebody. So you can't make a statement about the external world without you making the statement. But of course we know the blind spot of modernity was everything becomes so oriented out there, we forget that there's somebody over here seeing what's out there. And that's why that movement of reflection, turning the mirror back and saying, oh yes, I'm seeing something out there, but I'm doing the seeing. To me, that's where real science, where science becomes, I will say, an aesthetic undertaking. And science and art become basically two modalities which operate in a deeply connected fashion.